Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very excited to welcome Tim Robey from the Telegraph to the podcast today to talk about The Hospital, starring George C. Scott, released 50 years ago in December of 1971. How are we doing, Tim?
I am very well indeed, thank you. Greetings from London.
Yeah, so happy to have talked to a couple guests from London. I had Julie Dawn Cole, who played Veruca Salt in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I had her on the podcast last June to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Willy Wonka. So that was a huge thrill. I've had 3 or 4 guests from across the Atlantic, which is really exciting. So thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very excited. Thanks.
So we're talking about one of the last kind of big releases of 71 today, The Hospital, which won an Academy Award for Paddy Chayefsky for Best Original Screenplay. Before we get to the movie, Tim, I'd love to just ask you kind of what role has film played in your life? And if you have a few favorites you can share with us, that would be great.
Yeah, by all means. I've been professionally reviewing films for quite a long time now for the Telegraph, for 21 years. But even prior to that, I was a bit of a film nut when I was at university, and that's when I really started to get kind of super keen on film and writing about film. In fact, though, even before that, in my family, there's a kind of a bit of a film connection because my dad was working in insurance for the entertainment industry. So he used to work for many years at Pinewood Studios. Nice. Here in the home counties, and my brothers and I would sometimes go and like visit the set of like Aliens or Batman or whatever was being shot at Pinewood Studios. So yeah, that probably planted the seed of kind of film nerdery, I suppose. And then I've been lucky to land a career in it for this long, and the Telegraph have kept me there all this time.
That's so cool. Did you visit any sets of James Bond? Didn't that most of those shoot at the Pinewood?
I've seen the 007 soundstage, but that gets repurposed. Gets repurposed quite a lot to shoot various other things when there's not actually a Bond movie being shot. But probably in the late 80s, at the time of the Timothy Dalton ones, I might have been shown the door of it at one point. And I do really like The Living Daylights, especially. I remember being taken to the cast and crew screening of that movie in 1987. And I have a huge fondness for that film, kind of mainly because of the excitement of that.
I feel like the 2 Timothy Dalton movies are not talked about enough. I think they both have a lot of style, and he's really great, kind of ahead of his time. Like really the way he played that role.
I think he's terrific. Yeah, very much pointing the way forward to Daniel Craig now. And I especially like Living Daylights. I think License to Kill tips over a little bit into sort of slightly sadistic kind of Chuck Norris territory
at the end,
in keeping with what they were doing in the 80s in action cinema. I think it kind of like goes across the line slightly, and then they had to kind of pull back a bit for the Pierce Brosnan days, but it's better than I remembered it being the last time I watched it.
License to Kill, I believe, was the first PG-13 James Bond, and
in the UK it was the first one that was rated 15, which was quite a big jump up from PG here. So
there you go. Do you have any like all-time favorite movies you can share with us? Any like 2 or 3 that you just like revisit a lot or that you just really love?
Yeah, sure. I think my top 3 has stayed the same for a good while, and that they would be Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line.
That's a good one.
Usually number 1 for me.
Wow.
The Shining is my number 2, and Ingmar Bergman's Persona is probably my number 3. So that's where we're going.
What a triple feature that would be.
What a triptych, yeah.
The Shining, man, we just talked about Stanley Kubrick. A Clockwork Orange came out in December of 1971, so we did a long episode about him and his work. And I mean, so many great films. The Shining has such a special place in my heart. I can never say another Kubrick film is better than The Shining. I just love that movie so much. It's great.
Me too. It's the same. Yeah.
Are you big horror?
Almost irrational. It's an almost irrational love that I have for it. I'm probably one of those crazy people in the documentary Room 237 who just kind of lives, breathes, and eats The Shining, and it's just somewhere in my head at all times.
It is. It's for me. It's like more than a movie. It is just this thing that just exists in our consciousness. Like there's something about that movie. It's just there's nothing like it. Horror films are my favorite.
My dad insured the film, and he went to the set.
Because
they had
that was shot there.
The set actually nearly burned down at one point because there was so much there
Really?
was such a big lighting rig in the main lounge, in the main lobby
Uh-huh.
set. There was so much blinding light being shone through that those lights caught fire onto the set, and there was a big insurance claim.
Oh,
So
wow.
my dad was involved in underwriting that, and he visited the set and he walked around the set with Stanley Kubrick, and he had all these stories about it, which I remember. Yeah, I was wow.
Oh my
I would have been,
gosh.
1 year old at the time in 1979 or whatever, and that was all going on. Yeah.
Your dad, I mean, I would love to like see like a book of stories about all of those sets he got to visit and stuff. It'd be
Sure.
so
Yeah.
cool.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said you've been writing for the Telegraph for 21 years, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So tell me
Yeah.
about working for the Telegraph and how did that get started and kind of what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I was pretty much fresh out of university and didn't quite know what I was going to do career-wise.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done a bit of student journalism, and I guess through that, I knew someone who was already doing some feature writing for the Telegraph, and they asked this person to potentially become their new deputy film critic at the time.
Okay.
But this is my friend SF, but he didn't want to because he's running children's books. He had other fish to fry, as it were. So he instead threw some names into the hat, and one of them was mine. So I was very lucky to get an interview. And that is essentially the same job I still have, because there are still two critics at the Telegraph.
Okay.
And my colleague Robey and I kind of divide up the responsibilities of what we're reviewing week to week. And both of us do other things as well, some interviews here and there, and yeah, sort of feature writing and so on. But the kind of core of the job is the reviewing,
Mm-hmm.
which is, again, the nature of it has changed a lot over the 21 years. In that, back in 2000, it was all about what was going in print every week.
Right.
And that was they were concentrating on that, and then those reviews might at some point wind up on their website, if they could get around to it. And now it's sort of the opposite. We've got to file our reviews in time to meet embargoes online and to go live as soon as possible. And then some of those reviews we're going to get kind of cherry picked and put into print. So it's sort of flipped in that way over the period I've been doing it. And yeah, I mean, all sorts of things have changed about the film industry in that time, of course. But yeah, I'm very privileged that I still get to work there and do things like this and watch movies for fun and for
That's
for a
so
living.
cool. Are you allowed to reveal like your favorite picks of 2021 yet? Like, do you have a top 10 yet, or is that still to come?
I've been kind of mulling over my top 10, because the problem is the question in the UK is, do you go by the UK release of the film,
Oh yeah.
the US release of the film, the international premiere of the film? There are a lot of films that I might have seen like this year in Cannes, which have still not actually come out in the UK.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a complicated calculus,
Mm-hmm.
I would say. But there are a few movies that I'm pretty sure will figure in it, and one of them is that documentary Procession by Robert Greene,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
which is tremendously powerful doc on the subject of Catholic church abuse, sex abuse.
Interesting.
One of my other ones that I really loved, Come On, the Mike Mills film, which is
Oh
just
yeah, I want
out
to see
here
that.
now.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely loved that.
That is open here yet.
And there are all sorts. I thought quite a while ago now, 6 months ago, I guess, we saw Shiva Baby on Mubi. I thought Shiva Baby was a cracking film.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that will be in there. I'm sure I'm missing one that I put even above Procession, but I've my mind's gone blank on what I what that was, because we did submit our votes for the Critics Circle Film Awards about a week ago, and that was in the mix for sure. I'll try and remember it, and it will come back to me probably in the middle of our conversation. I'll just I
am so behind right now. I have a full-time job, and then whenever I have like a 2-hour window to watch something, I usually watch something for this podcast. So I'm like,
really,
okay, I need the next few weeks. I need to catch up on some of these end of the year 2021 releases. Looks like a lot of good stuff. Yeah.
But yes, for sure.
All right, so let's get to our movie today, The Hospital from 50 years ago. Had you heard of this movie before?
I'd heard of it only because I knew of its. What I remembered was the Best Actor nomination for George C. Scott. I'd forgotten that it won Best Screenplay as well. But that, in my kind of little much thumbed book of Oscar wins over the years, I remember thinking, oh, there's a George C. Scott movie that came out, a year after his Oscar, and which I had not seen.
Yeah,
a very well known playwright, obviously, and but yeah, that was sort of my extent of it. I had the impression that it was some sort of slightly madcap satire
Yeah.
There's a Lindsay Anderson movie called Britannia Hospital,
Okay.
which I think is kind of doing a similar thing for the UK health industry. But yeah, that's about all I knew.
Yeah, the George C. Scott Oscar nomination is really interesting here because he won the year before for Patton.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he refused the Oscar, right? Like he didn't show up to the ceremony.
Yeah.
He didn't like the idea of competition, and he like I think he refused that Oscar.
No, genuinely, yeah. He didn't show up, and he said, "I don't want this." Yeah,
I don't want this.
He didn't think that it should be a competitive sport, and
so
that was his third nomination. Yeah.
So then a year later, they nominate him again. I just like that's kind of interesting.
I think it's one of those. There are certain Oscar nominations that come along straight after someone has won, and it's like an afterglow nomination. Jeff Bridges in True Grit. Straight after Crazy Heart, and Eddie Redmayne in The Danish Girl straight after the Theory of Everything as well. Theory of Everything.
That was a year later.
And often you sort of shrug and go a little bit, did they need that? They just won one. But I mean, I do think that sometimes those performances are very good. But yeah.
It's just interesting to me that if he would refuse it like that, I mean, it's one thing for like a Jeff Bridges, he's so great in Crazy Heart, wins the Oscar, very appreciative, and then he's great in True Grit, and so of course he's nominated. Sure. And I believe Sandra Bullock turned to him and said, "How much is enough?"
Yeah,
at the ceremony, like you need to be nominated every year, Jeff. But for George C. Scott to refuse the Oscar, and then I mean, it's not like The Hospital was like this huge end of year release that they couldn't ignore it. They had to. It wasn't that kind of movie, so it's like that's really interesting to me. And then I believe he's never nominated for an Oscar ever again. This is it. The last one.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, again, like you feel a little bit sorry for some of the other actors of 1971. Poor Warren Beatty doesn't get nominated for McCabe and Mrs. Miller. He's sitting right there, and one of his best performances. But yeah.
Malcolm McDowell was not nominated for Clockwork Orange. That one is really
right?
striking.
I've forgotten that. That's pretty shocking. Yeah,
like the movie Clockwork Orange was nominated for Best Picture
everywhere. Yeah,
sure. And I mean it was controversial at the time, but Malcolm McDowell is in like every scene, and he is dynamite in that movie. He's amazing, and I'm like, how does that not get up?
That is crazy. You're making me I need to dig out my little
guidebook. They nominated Walter Matthau for Koch, which is this really weird, awkward performance. We talked about it in September. He plays like a much older man, like 30 years, 40 years older than he was at the time, in a movie directed by Jack Lemmon. It's one of the probably the most obscure movies we talked about of this last year. And I'm like, how does that get in? I guess just love for him. Yeah, the movie isn't great. It's like, that gets in. George C. Scott gets in for The Hospital.
Peter
after
Finch
having just
really
won.
Peter Finch, brilliant in Sunday Bloody Sunday. Very much just
so good.
You can't take it away from Topol in Fiddler on the Roof or Gene Hackman. So it's a very solid batch of nominees. But yeah, there were other people who might have been knocking on the door there. I think Beatty being prime example.
Gene Hackman was a great win for The French Connection. He's fantastic in that. My choice would be Peter Finch for Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, incredible.
Loved him in that. Yeah. And interesting that like Peter Finch and Chayefsky would collaborate 5 years later on Network, which would finally win Peter Finch an Academy Award after he had passed away, which was like a really weird few months there. And Patty Chayefsky won again for Screenplay on Network. Two very different movies. I put on The Hospital thinking like it would be kind of similar in tone or kind of that fast pace and huge on. I mean, it's got some similarities as we'll get into, but it definitely felt tonally a little different than what he gives us in Network. Before we get into our thoughts on the film, I thought I'd share a little plot summary of the movie and some research I did on the film. So for those of you who are not aware of what The Hospital is all about, here's just a brief synopsis. So George C. Scott, he plays Herbert Bach, the chief of medicine in a New York City teaching hospital. He's contemplating suicide. He's impotent. His wife has left him. His children are not speaking to him. His hospital is also suffering from a recent series of inexplicable deaths. In the midst of the setbacks, Bach is romantically drawn to the much younger Barbara, played by Diana Rigg, which I believe I read this was her American feature film debut. Her father is a patient at the hospital. As Barbara restores Bach's will to live, it turns out the hospital deaths may be murders. It's kind of like the just general synopsis of what the movie's about. Do you want anything to add to that that's not on in that synopsis there?
Well, that sounds about right. There's a lot of mistaken identity in the movie where certain patients are winding up dead and then they don't turn out to be the patient they even thought they were.
Right.
And then there's a question of whether there's some kind of conspiracy surrounding this or what is even going on. There are shots of a kind of unseen figure walking around the corridors of the hospital, coshing people on the back of the head and knocking them unconscious, and then that becomes a sort of whodunit element, I guess.
Yeah, but it's not a slasher film.
It's not. No.
That would have been a different.
How do we just describe it? It's a kind of sort of satire, come whodunit, come ensemble drama, romance, comedy. It's got kind of a bit of everything, really.
And that's kind of a sign of Chayefsky, which he also delivers a network, is that it's not just one genre. Like it kind of jumps around a little bit. I mean, at some points, I'm like, am I supposed to be laughing at the fact that character just died?
Yeah.
Like the movie doesn't make it easy for you. You're kind of like, what's the tone here?
Definitely not. And I wonder actually how it would play with an audience. I think a lot of that awkwardness would be quite interesting to experience in an audience. I was just watching it on my own here in London, and as you say, there's some very odd tonal moments. There's a sequence where an Apache Indian is performing a kind of a ritual, like a rite, to try and cure one of the patients who's lying there, Diana Rigg's father.
Right.
And I'm a bit like, does the film sort of think it's automatically kind of hilarious that this Indian is performing this rite? Because certain things in the script kind of indicate that that's what we're meant to be thinking. And then they keep doing callbacks to that, because there's another patient in the same room who kind of thinks he's hallucinating because he sees this Indian there. And we keep coming back to that. And I was a bit like, how would this play now with an audience? I don't know. But then there are lots of things which are the dialogue, as you would expect from Chayefsky, is very quick fire a lot of the time, very sharp, scathing, bitter, funny. And George C. Scott gets a lot of it, which is kind of, you can sort of see what attracted him to the role, I think, just the meatiness of those monologues, and when he's just absolutely in despair about the chaos around him. And I would say, if I was going to draw out one main parallel with Network, it would probably be that sense of kind of bitter despair in the core of him as a main character. He points the way to Howard Finch, doesn't he? To Howard Beale, Peter. Yeah,
Howard Beale,
character in Network.
That's interesting.
I'll say that again. He points the way, doesn't he, to Howard Beale, Peter Finch character in Network.
Peter Finch in Network. Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, and obviously. The monologues too. The monologues made me think of Network too. There's a lot of moments in this, sometimes where the cameras is like locked off and George C. Scott's just talking away, and it's like, okay, here we go with the monologue.
Totally. And there's even a scene where he opens is one of the centerpiece scenes with him and Diana Rigg, where he kind of opens the door out, a window out of his office, and he sort of screams into the night, we don't cure anyone, we don't heal, we don't heal, we don't cure. And it's very much like Peter Finch again, although shot from behind him, which is kind of an interesting choice. One other thing is that almost a different character picks up that baton towards the end of this movie. It would probably be a spoiler to reveal which character, but then there's another character who's kind of going even more mad than him in this situation, who then becomes the real Howard Beale, if you like.
Oh, feel free to, if you want to give spoilers away.
Oh, sure.
We do that on Film at 50. The movie's been out for 50 years.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah. In the first few months of the podcast, I would like try to not give away the last 10 minutes. And then I'm like, it's been 50 years. I kind of feel like anyone listening to this, you're going to get more out of it if you've like watched the film. So I don't know.
True,
So it's all good if you want to talk about.
But I guess it's just because of the whodunit element. It has, and something about the presence of Diana Rigg made me think of this, because she's in that Agatha Christie movie, Evil Under the Sun.
Oh, okay.
One of those Peter Ustinov Christies, and this has slightly the structure of an Agatha Christie whodunit, in that who is this? Why are all these people dying? Why all the doctors being in some ways murdered, or what's going on? And there is a kind of reveal about that and what's going on.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll let our viewers or our listeners discover that if they want to. But.
Yeah. So this was Diana Rigg's feature film debut in America, and then she passed away in 2020, I believe. And then her last movie just came out by Edgar Wright, Last Night in Soho. She's in that. So she had a 50-year career in film, which is really, really cool. Obviously, later in her career, we most know her from Game of Thrones, but she's just had a remarkable career in film and television, and On
And
stage. I think she was on stage. Yeah, she was on stage too.
I saw her in a really legendary production of Medea, the Euripides tragedy in the 90s, directed by Jonathan Kent, and she was Medea, and she was the most ferocious Medea you can possibly imagine.
Oh, I bet she would have been amazing on stage.
Yeah.
I read Medea in college for a drama class I was in. That was such a cool play. I would love to. Yeah. I've never seen that like on the stage, and with Diana Rigg.
Oh my god, yeah.
Oh, wow, that'd be fantastic. So let's see. So this film was written by Paddy Chayefsky. His career was not doing well around 69, 70. He had a couple flops. He began to consider a film that would be set among the civil unrest taking place at the time. When his wife, Susan, received poor care at a hospital, he pitched to United Artists a story based at a hospital. To ensure he had the same kind of creative control given to playwrights, he formed a company called Simcha Productions, and then he commenced research, reading medical books and visiting hospitals. I assume, like, especially in 70, 71, to write a film like this, you'd have to do a lot of research and like all the terminology. You'd have to really spend some time at the hospitals, and you can feel that in the movie. You feel like he's getting it right.
Absolutely. And some of the kind of minor characters who George C. Scott kind of has to talk to are explaining. In fact, on your image that we can see at the moment, there's an example of that. This chap here has a really difficult monologue to deliver, in which there are so many medical terms being thrown out to describe the series of disasters and mistakes that lead to a patient in perfect health being essentially mistaken for one with some kind of kidney failure and having an operation accidentally performed on him, which causes him to be nearly dead. And yeah, there's a lot. Clearly, he kind of looked into the way that might possibly happen. He must have researched that a lot. And his director, I'm sure you were going to come on to Arthur Hiller, but they had collaborated before as well on a film I've not seen called The Americanization of Emily.
Right.
Which is a 1964 kind of war satire, from what I gather. Julie Andrews.
Yeah, the same year as Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people know that Julie Andrews was also in a black and white drama the same year.
Yeah. But I think Arthur Hiller's contribution to this film was, for me, the most surprising kind of asset that it had, because he's a director we associate with quite kind of lowbrow comedies and those Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor movies, for example. And I think his career kind of spun off into a slightly kind of predictable rut, you might say. But people argue that this is his best film by some distance, and I can kind of see that.
Okay.
There's a real energy to it, I think, especially for me in the ensemble scenes and the kind of what you might say the more Altman-esque kind of passages of the film, where we're moving through a lot of characters in a state of chaos and stress, which you could compare to MASH the same year as this, or to many other Altman films later in the 70s and so on. And Arthur Hiller does not a bad Altman impression, basically, is what I'm going to say.
I love that you mentioned Altman. I wrote him in my notes. At one point, the camera is following one character at the hospital, and then the camera like pans over this way, and then in the same shot, we follow another character, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of like an Altman film.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So I wrote that down. And Arthur Hiller, really interesting part of his career right now in this time period. He made 4 films within 2 years. He did The Out of Towners. He did Love Story, the biggest movie of 1970. We did a long episode about that about a year ago, and very different in tone and pacing than his other films of the time. We talked about his third film, Plaza Suite, that came out in April of 71. We talked about that earlier this year. That was with Walter Matthau, and it was like 3 stories in one movie. My guest really, really hated that. There were some things I liked about it. She was like, nope. And then we get to this. It's like, wow. I mean, most directors, right, make maybe 1 every 2 years or 3, and that he made 4 films released within a 2-year calendar window. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? That they all have their positive qualities. I like some more than others, but.
And even some of the reviews of the hospital at the time, which I scanned, seemed kind of quite surprised that he was able to pull it off in contrast to something like Love Story, because Love Story was never any critic's favorite film, and I think a lot of critics rolled their eyes at its success and how well it did at the Oscars and so on. So it's not too surprising to me that that of the 3 main collaborators in this film creatively, that it was Paddy Chayefsky and George C. Scott who got the Oscar attention and not Arthur Hiller. I think they were like, you've had your Love Story moment. We're not nominating you for this one.
Yeah. Love Story did very well at the awards ceremonies. It won Best Picture Drama at the Golden Globes. It got nominated at the Academy Awards, but Patton was able to overtake it for the Academy Awards. I'm like, the movie was so popular, it wouldn't have surprised me if at the time they had maybe given Patton to like director or something, but then picture goes to Love Story. I'm happy that did not happen. But then and then he has another movie 4 months later. Then he has this one. It's like, when is he making all these movies? like it's like the career of an actor, where an actor can be in 2 or 3 movies a year, but like directing that's usually a 2-year commitment for one movie.
And maybe something in that observation might explain how this film stays afloat. The energy has quite a kind of nervy energy to it, I think, when in those scenes where the camera's just kind of roving around and picking up detail about everything that's going on and going wrong in the hospital. I do think he directs it pretty well, and he keeps the script alive in the same way that the really good ensemble work in Network works. In fact, some of the shots and the photography choices even reminded me a little bit of what some like Frederick Wiseman documentaries look like from that era. You know, all those movies where he goes in an institution and you just kind of like see what's going on in the corridor of the hospital, or the meeting, the kind of outrage of a bunch of people sitting down protesting. There's that kind of visual is what we get quite often with the extras and the crowd, and he directs it really well. I have slightly more doubts about the kind of one-on-one aspect of the movie when we just sit down with George C. Scott and Diana Rigg's characters one-on-one. I feel as though the writing has to step up and take kind of center stage, and it becomes very stagey. And I feel as though their performances are very strong, but I don't know about how well Diana Rigg is cast exactly in this part. It's a very odd role. I don't know how we would even describe her role. She's a kind of acid casualty, sort of slightly mad, away with the fairies, kind of sex pot. She's immediately flirting with George C. Scott's character and describes him as a big bear that she kind of wants to ensnare. He, of course, keeps saying that he's impotent. His character is sort of determinedly impotent until the moment when desire takes over him. His desire takes over him, and he sort of, as she puts it, ravages him 3 times in the course of one night. He then says this was a rape. He admits it was a rape and says it was a rape motivated by suicidal rage. And this was all going on right in the middle of the movie, and then the film has to sort of slightly recover from that sequence and get back into the plot. It's a very odd interlude, I found.
That's the one quote from the movie I wrote down. He said, "I raped you in suicidal rage. How'd we get to love?" It's like, that's a line I've never heard in a movie.
I do think there's a lot of like 70s sexual politics going on in that part of the movie, which I kind of grappled with and was not very comfortable with. And I do think some of them come back to play a bit in Network, I have to admit, because I think Network is quite cruel to Faye Dunaway's character. It's quite cruel, and sort of the way Chayefsky writes these women, the sex is very foregrounded with them, and Diana Rigg is sort of doing a lot of showing off her legs and so on, and she's very much kind of objectified from the word go in this film. And Faye Dunaway in Network is kind of the devil incarnate, and she's kind of got all these sexual hang-ups and all this stuff again. And it also tallies a little bit with the way that George C. Scott's character, it does he vents kind of in misogynistic rage quite a bit in this film, doesn't he? He's sort of complaining about the nurses and how they're always on their periods, and that's why they've taken their eyes off the ball. And the character is clearly a mess. You know, he's messed up. He's got this failed marriage and children who don't want anything to do with him, and he's hitting a bottle, and he's one of those kind of venting misogynist kind of nightmare characters. You can sort of imagine Jack Nicholson in the role in some way. But yeah, for me, it's a little bit unclear at what point, you know, we're on board with this guy, or what point we're meant to think that he is a bit of a slightly monstrous figure in some ways, and how well Chayefsky is delineating that. It's definitely a film of its era in these ways.
That's exactly right. Do you think that George C. Scott and, like you said, that Diana Rigg might have been miscast in this? I also wondered if George C. Scott, he's such like a dramatic actor, and the movie has these little whims of like humor here and there, and I wondered if an actor who was slightly more known for comedy might have been a better pick for this. Or do you think Scott is well chosen for this?
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I do think when he's furious, which is mainly towards the beginning of the movie when things are starting to go wrong, he's very good. He can just he does rage really well, and you're sort of you buy into it. He vitriol and rage are his fortes. He also looks remarkably like Paddy Chayefsky himself in this role, with the kind of hair swept back and the beard. If you looked up a picture of Paddy Chayefsky, there's a strange parallel between them.
Oh, interesting.
But I do think that the comedy aspects of it he's not really involved with the comedy in a way. He sort of just stands kind there while it's all going on around him. So that's not such a problem. I'm trying to think who else you could have maybe cast in 1971.
So yeah, the studio wanted Walter Matthau again. This guy, Walter Matthau. I've said that guy's name maybe more than anyone else's last year. I did 3 movies about him on the podcast. He comes up a lot. Walter Matthau or Burt Lancaster. Those were the 2 actors that the studio wanted. But I guess that Paddy Chayefsky actually had the power to choose who he wanted, and he wanted George C. Scott. That was Paddy Chayefsky's choice.
I do think it pays off, the casting, and I do think his scene with his psychiatrist, or the psychiatrist, I should say, the hospital's head of psychiatry, near the beginning, where he talks about having had these suicidal thoughts and having contemplated different ways to kill himself that no one would know was suicide, is a very strong scene. And he kind of he feels humiliated. The character feels humiliated at the end of it. And George C. Scott kind of digs deep in that scene. It's not just a ranting scene. He shows kind of vulnerability. But then the big Diana Rigg kind of interlude that I mentioned is again another good showpiece for him. And it's during that scene that he does his kind of we don't heal, we don't cure bit, which is a good bit. But I'm still uncomfortable with the kind of dramatic dynamics of that scene. I guess I'm just not really sure that the film is getting anywhere beyond that rant, and it has to kind of recover. But then the plot kind of takes over a bit more towards the end. And it's almost like he's sort of standing around while the plot figures itself out.
That's a good point.
He's not really he's not that much of an active participant in the last kind of 20 minutes of the movie. Think about it. He's just kind of standing there, which is, I don't know, maybe it's meant to reveal some sense of helplessness with the system just crumbling around him. But I thought it could have maybe given his character a bit more of a payoff there.
Yeah, I like the choice he makes at the very end. I like the kiss he gives her and the choice he makes right before the end credits. I like that. But I think you're right. There is a portion of the end where he is kind of lost in the plot. Wait, he's our hero or protagonist, and why are we kind of stepping away from him? There was that a little bit towards the end.
It's like I was saying about Howard Beale and how you think he's the Howard Beale of this story. And even to the point of thinking about his own suicide. Obviously Howard Beale does commit suicide, but then it's almost like another character takes that role in the last section. And it's I've forgotten the name. Bernard Hughes is the name of the actor in this part. But he has this kind of crazy wild man routine to do, which kind of pulls focus there at the end.
The same thing kind of happens in Network. Howard Beale, I feel like he's not in very much of the last half hour of Network. He kind of he has the great final scene when he gets shot.
Yeah, oh sure. Yeah.
But before that, I feel like the focus of the end is on Faye Dunaway and William Holden and their dynamic. It's not really about at a certain point, it's like the movie has moved beyond Beale, Peter Finch.
And again, I did think about those Holden Dunaway scenes quite a bit during the big Rigg scenes here as well. There's something about the energy between those two characters which is not dissimilar.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? I mean, part of the problem is I think Network is just a brilliant movie. I've watched that 10 or more times. I just think it's so good. And watching the scenes between George C. Scott and Diana Rigg in this, where they're just the camera's kind of locked off and they're just talking and there's nothing behind them. They're it's like a blank white wall and they're just talking back and forth. It's this isn't quite at the level of the dialogue and the situations we get in Network. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm with you, yeah, and I can sense Chayefsky kind of trying to work up her character into some kind of satirical. She's a very extreme, strange figure, and I wonder what any actress could have done to kind of like bring her to life a bit more, because Diana Rigg just seems to be basically sort of playing herself in a way. She doesn't really connect with this role particularly for me. She's just kind of saying the lines, but
again, I feel like an actress with a little bit more comedic sensibility. I mean, maybe it wouldn't work, but I'm thinking of like, what if like a Shelley Duvall or a Lily Tomlin was in that role? Like someone with a little bit more comedy background, but played it real, like drama, like could have maybe made that character more memorable.
Interesting that you've chosen two Altman actors there.
Duvall, yeah,
yeah.
Exactly.
But that maybe would have worked, yeah.
But yeah, I find casting of movies and television so interesting, because sometimes like just like a different actor for even a supporting role like changes everything about the movie. Well, it's like really, it's important.
Now that you say this, I think beyond the leads, I think my favorite performances are in the supporting cast here, and I'm going to pick two of them out. I really like Nancy Marchand, who's best known for playing
The Sopranos
mother, here, of course. But she has a really good and very low-key role in this as the kind of head nurse of the hospital, who's the one who has to sort of stand there at the beginning while George C. Scott is kind of screaming his head off at her because one of her nurses has administered an IV drip and killed someone who's not even meant to be in the bed that he was in. There's a whole mix-up at the beginning, which is quite funny, and then suddenly quite horrifying. And she stands there and she's just so her keynote in this performance is just fatigue. She's just kind of there. She's got her clipboard. She's walking down the corridors. Kind of, what fresh hell is this? And then she's got the head the head of staff screaming at her. And there's just a moment where she says, "Will there be anything else, doctor?" you just get this woman's absolute despair with the situation. I thought she was very good. And I also really liked Frances Sternhagen,
yes,
who has a bit more kind of spark and a bit more kind of mischief to her, I guess. She's like the head accountant at the hospital who has to kind of bill everyone, and she's sort of running around like a headless chicken while all of these crazy cases are happening, and she's having to kind of record everyone's details and trying to figure out what their insurance is and so on. I thought both of them gave a really good turn, essentially, and in Sternhagen's case, it was very much like a kind of Altman character. It was like one of those Geraldine Chaplin kind of characters just popping up. I like them both a lot.
Yeah, I love Frances Sternhagen. She was on Sex and the City and
Misery.
One of my favorite movies is Misery.
Misery.
She's got kind of a smaller role in Misery. When we think of Misery, we think of James Caan and Kathy Bates.
Yeah.
But her performance in Misery plays a big role in why I love that movie. Like her relationship so with Richard Farnsworth is great.
Yeah. And I like really funny. She's in Outland as well, the Sean Connery High Noon.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's a good career she had.
I did a year of Sean Connery movies in 2017 or 2018. Like there were he had been in like over 60 films, and I had seen maybe 20 of them. So I watched a lot of his movies. Maybe my favorite discovery outside of The Hill from '65 by Sidney Lumet, which was great.
Year. Incredible, yeah.
was Outland. I really enjoyed Outland. It's a little cheesy here and there. The special effects don't hold up great, but like that's a really great Sean Connery performance and character. And yes, Sternhagen was really good in that one.
I would love to see Outland on the big screen, and I really like Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry Goldsmith's music is one of the reasons I really like that film. Yeah,
love Jerry Goldsmith. Yeah. All right, so a few other things about the movie. So I think something that was ahead of its time. It's funny watching it. Like my partner and I are watching The Resident right now, and it's just like so much drama and like about a hospital, and it's like watching The Hospital from '71. You're like, oh, I've kind of been here, done that. But like in '71, this was kind of a revolutionary movie, a way to tell a story and have the cameras just roaming around a hospital like this. I mean, were there films before this that really took place for 90 minutes plus at a hospital and just like following a bunch of characters around? I feel like the way that the screenplay and Hiller and the way they tell the story, I feel like it was kind of revolutionary in '71. People hadn't really seen a lot of movies quite like this.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Although it does make me think about the fact that 1 year earlier they had Airport, which is a movie set basically in an airport, obviously with no such satirical tone and with more of a kind of disaster movie element to it.
Yeah,
but I think audiences were kind of quite enjoying that idea of you put a movie in one place and
with a bunch of characters.
What the most drama you can kind of pack in there might be. even though it tips into kind of farce in this case.
I love the idea of Paddy Chayefsky watching Airport and saying, "I'm going to one up this movie.
I'm going to do this." Yeah, exactly.
Best Picture nominee, Airport.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
That, have you seen Airport? Man, that is a slog.
I saw it a long time ago. Yeah.
It was thankfully it came out before I started my podcast in fall of 2020, so I didn't do an episode about it, but we did a year-end, like we talked about all the Best Picture nominees, and that was the one I had a few things to say about Airport. Which I guess we might get into down the road because there were 3 sequels. We'll see. We'll see how I'm feeling about that. But yeah, I liked the way the camera was used in a lot of the movie. I have a quote from Arthur Hiller, how he kind of approached this movie. He said his goal was to have the camera reflect the chaos and confusion taking place in the hospital. I've always liked that sort of realistic feel, he states. I wanted the feeling that the audience was always peeking around the corner. So yeah, he approached this movie differently than the last 3 he had made. It wasn't like he was just, oh, okay, I'm just going to shoot this just how I shot Love Story. Like, he approached this a little bit differently.
And you can sort of tell that it comes on really strong. I mean, the first few scenes in this film, even the opening shot of this film, I was like, this is alive. This film is alive. We're amidst lots of characters who are in a kind of high emotional state, charging the corridors, protesting about the system that's failing them. And I believed in those extras. And you know, that there's something when a crowd has been directed well, you really notice it in a film, because there's so many movies that we see in which, you know, no one's bothering to tell the extras what to do or what to wear or what emotions they're meant to be feeling or whatever, and they just sort of stand there and clog up the works basically. A movie like this, they're a vital part of it, and I do think my feeling is the more characters that are on screen in this film, the more I'm liking it in general. When it kind of narrows itself down just to George C. Scott and Diana Rigg together, even though, you know, very impressive actors though they are, I feel as though I'm less involved strangely, and I feel as though the writing becomes more sententious, more pretentious, which is a bit of a Paddy Chayefsky thing for me. I think that sometimes you can just hear he's like the Aaron Sorkin of his day, slightly. In that you can hear his own voice kind of coming through certain characters a lot.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot too, and I wondered if is it the chemistry between Rigg and Scott that's not connecting? Because at the end of Network, when William Holden is talking to Faye Dunaway, it sounds very written. It's like, clearly this is a monologue from a script, but he sells it in a way we believe in that relationship, to a point where I forget that I'm thinking, oh, this is clearly like written. The way he talks, and you believe it at the end of Network, whereas this one I could kind of, this is a little stagey at times.
Perhaps Network just has the virtue of having more characters who are well written to work in this ensemble together. So not only those two, but obviously Ned Beatty with his famous monologue down the board table, and Beatrice Straight with her Oscar-winning
one
tribe, one scene, 8-minute role. He gives everyone their time of day, I guess, in that film.
Robert Duvall,
and of course, and in this, I do like some of the other characters, like the Nancy Marchands and so on, but they're more reactive, really, and. Yeah, maybe it's. I think a lot of it is just the writing of Diana Rigg's role for me. I do think it's the choice of that character as the sounding board for Howard Bock. Is that his name? George C. Scott's.
Bock,
something like that. Howard Bock, something like that.
Herbert Bock.
We go from Herbert Bock to Howard Beale. I mean, there's definitely
Herbert Bock, Howard Beale.
HB, you know. Anyway, I do think if he'd found someone else to allow that character to sort of expose himself a bit more, maybe I'd have liked it more. I just don't think her character quite comes off.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot to like in this. I feel like if you were a fan of Network and Paddy Chayefsky's writing, I feel like it's worth a look. It's not, I think, as strong in many ways as Network, but I mean, I think the other problem with it is that it's set in a hospital for almost the entire movie, whereas Network, it's a much more open film. We go to a lot of different places. There's a lot of style, a lot of cool sets. The set of Howard Beale's show, and in the hospital, it's like there are stretches of this movie where you're just seeing white.
And actually,
and we're not leaving. It's like,
I kind of wanted to leave a bit. There's a moment where George C. Scott gets very frustrated and says, right, I'm going to go out and get drunk. And we cut to an exterior for the first time, and there's some like shots of the city which look great, some lightning coming out, and I'm like, oh great, he's going to go to a bar, and maybe we're going to find out a bit more about him and his life outside the hospital. But then the very next scene is just him in another hospital room. It's him back with another patient, and I was like, I kind of wanted that escape a little bit, but
even for a few minutes. I mean, the other movie that Hiller directed in 71 Plaza Suite, it's the same thing. We're in a hotel for the whole movie. Like, we don't leave that building.
Well, this is a Neil Simon thing, isn't it?
Neil Simon.
Like a Neil Simon play.
Yeah.
You put characters in one place, which I guess dates back to, you know, Grand Hotel and all those kind of films. Dinner at 8 or something like that. But it's a strange one to find that. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot going on in this script, but the structure of it is odd and is quite stagey, I think.
So I was surprised to learn, I guess the film did modestly well at the box office. This was not a huge flop by any means. It earned 9 million, according to what I read online, which isn't a lot, but in 1971, early 72, that's pretty respectable for a movie of this level. Like, I don't think this costs very much money to produce The Hospital. The reviews were mostly favorable. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars. He said The Hospital is a better movie than you may have been led to believe. So what does that mean? Like the public was being told to not see it? Just based on the advertising, I guess. Like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought it'd be.
They were selling it. They were trying to sell it as like the next MASH as well, weren't they?
Oh, okay.
I guess MASH must have come out in the summer.
MASH was January 1970.
Yeah.
So 2 years before.
They were trying to sell it like MASH because there's a poster where it says if you thought MASH was crazy, just wait for Hospital or something like that. I've seen one poster like that.
Okay, yeah. I actually never thought about it. It's funny. I thought of Altman. I thought of Lily Tomlin and Shelley Duvall. While I was watching The Hospital, MASH did not come to mind. I guess it should have, because it does have some of those similar qualities. More of a comedy for sure. Yeah, so the critics liked it at the time, and then it got 2 Oscar nominations, one for George C. Scott for Best Actor and for Best Original Screenplay, which won that year. Do you know what the other nominees were for Best Original Screenplay? What it beat out?
So I'm going to try and guess, because the big ones that year were the adaptations, weren't they, really? So, you know,
French Connection,
Clockwork Orange, French Connection, Fiddler on the Roof, presumably.
Last Picture Show. My favorite outside of Willy Wonka, which is just like a childhood favorite, a movie I adore. Last Picture Show for me is probably the strongest movie of 71. I love that movie. But
so, and I think was Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Sunday Bloody Sunday was nominated. The other big one was Klutz, which won Jane Fonda the Academy Award for Best Actress. That was nominated for Original Screenplay. The other 2 nominees were Summer of 42, which is a film I enjoyed more than my guest for that episode last April, which kind of had a love story feel to it, kind of a romance. And then the last nomination was for Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion.
I've seen that film.
Which was the Academy Award winner for Best Foreign Language Film of 1970.
Yeah, this is when they do weird things with the foreign language movies, and sometimes they come in 2 years in a row and so on. Yeah.
So I guess because it was released internationally in 1970, it wins the 71 Oscar for 70. But then I don't think it came to the United States until 71 sometime. And so then it's before Screenplay, I guess, for the following year. That's when it's given the nomination. But that's always weird when you're like really interested in Oscar history and looking at the nominations, when you see the same movie title over 2 different years. You're like, what?
It happened even as recently as like 15 years ago with something, didn't it? That I can't remember what the film was, but there was one film which popped up again the following year.
It makes sense if it's released like in the fall of a year internationally, and then maybe the next summer or something it comes here or comes to the United States. Here for me. But that can happen, but it's pretty rare these days. Maybe it's happened once or twice in the last 20 years. It's pretty rare. Did you like that film? That I had some issues with that movie, but it was interesting for sure. Investigation.
I did like it, I must say.
So would you have picked The Hospital to win this one?
I don't think I would. I think I would probably have picked Sunday Bloody Sunday. That was original, wasn't it? So it's Penelope Gilliat's script, isn't it?
I would go with Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Famously, she was the one who was doing the New Yorker reviews 6 months of the year. when Pauline Kael was doing the other 6 months of the year. They
who
basically
wrote that
shared
script?
the job. Yep.
Oh,
So
I didn't know that.
She's the writer of that script. So Pauline Kael had to do a very diplomatic job in reviewing that movie, which was a big film at the time, and she did like it. But if you sort of read between the lines, I think you can kind of sense that she's slightly resentful that she's having to kind of give a positive review to her colleagues' script and film. But no, that for me probably would be the winning one. Klute, I like, not really for the script.
Yeah, I enjoy that
the
film more
and
for other things.
Yeah, sure.
So it's like when if Gene Siskel had to review Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
Right, exactly.
Roger Ebert's script.
That was it. Yeah.
I believe I read a quote from him. He said, yeah, it wasn't very good. I don't think Gene Siskel liked it. Right. But that was different because they weren't a team yet, so he could just knock it if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But so let's see a few other awards that it was also nominated for 2 BAFTA awards. Scott for Best Actor, Chayefsky for Best Screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
Chayefsky won the Golden Globe and the Writers Guild Award for a script. At the Golden Globe, Scott was nominated. Diana Rigg got a Best Supporting Actress nomination at the Golden Globes, but not for the Oscar.
To me like one of those Welcome to Hollywood kind of nominations that you sometimes get at the
Best
Globe.
Newcomer.
Like, we like you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so she got that. I don't think, did Diana Rigg ever get an Oscar nomination? I don't think she ever did.
No, don't think she did. No.
Yeah.
She would have she probably won an Olivier Award for Medea and probably plenty of other kind of BAFTA nods, but yeah.
Everything, I mean, she's just such a stunning actress and performer. Kind of surprised me. I was like, man, she never got just a really juicy dynamite film role that got her a nomination at some point.
It's true, isn't it? Yeah. I do think that her preternatural confidence kind of makes her kind of fun to watch in this movie, even though I just find the character so strange. I'm still kind of like glued to her just because she just has that kind of charisma which just radiates.
Yeah.
I tell you what I really enjoy her in is Evil Under the Sun. She's an absolute scream in that film, which is the Ustinov Agatha Christie adaptation that I mentioned.
Okay. What's it called?
Evil Under the Sun.
Evil Under the
Sun. Incredible cast.
What year was that?
Film. It's one of. So this is, you remember the Death on the Nile adaptation from 1978?
78.
Which is all-star cast. This was the kind of follow-up to that in 1981, I believe.
Okay.
And it's Ustinov, Maggie Smith, James Mason, Sylvia Miles, Roddy McDowell, Jane Birkin, Maggie Smith. Oh God, it's
Maggie Smith is in Death on the Nile too.
She's in them both. She plays
the same character.
There's a scene where different characters. Okay. Maggie Smith's the hotelier in Evil Under the Sun who hates Diana Rigg's character.
Oh, cool.
And there's a scene where they competitively sing "You're the Top," while kind of Cole Porter's "You're the Top." They're kind of draping each other over a grand piano and trying to upstage the other one, which is sort of camp heaven. It's great.
And I believe Diana Rigg played Mrs. Danvers in a Rebecca remake in the 90s.
That's right? Yeah, that's right. Which I guess it was on TV.
Yeah, because I did a bonus episode for this podcast about the new Rebecca on Netflix, which was not good. We talked about the Hitchcock film, which I love. And then in my research, I'm like, oh, they did another remake in the 90s, which I'm like, eh. But then I saw Diana Rigg was Danvers. I went, oh, that could be interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think neither of us really loved her in this part so much, this movie. But it's not really her fault. We just think maybe it was miscast, something to do with the writing. Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping to see. I didn't look up her filmography of the 70s. I'm hoping I get to see her in more stuff in the years to come here.
Sure.
And then the last thing I had about the movie, it was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry in 1995. So a lot of classic great works are picked for that year to year. The Hospital got that in 1995. My final question about the movie, Tim, is kind of like if they were to make The Hospital now, if they took Chayefsky's script and modernized it, made it again into, coming into 2022, like how would it be similar? How would it be different? How would it be different? Could they make this movie today, do you think?
They would need to get back in there and research how, healthcare has changed in the last 50 years. I mean, we haven't talked that much about the theme of the film, and obviously the kind of continuing crisis of healthcare in America and so on.
Yeah, you could play into that in a new
You would
version.
really want to, I think, and you would want to
Mm-hmm.
make it as current as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think I do feel as though you would have to deal with the. I don't know whether we are hoping for a complete update here, but I think you'd have to deal with the dynamics between those two main characters, and I think it might be interesting if they were ethnically different, for
Yeah,
example. That would, I
maybe
think, be an
swap genders.
obvious
Yep.
way to go, or swap genders or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. I think that would make sense to me.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you would probably
It's a very
veer
white
more
film.
towards it's very
It's
white, and I think you would probably need to veer more towards the sort of side of realism in a way, and make it as kind of grittily realistic and despairing as possible, without needing too much comic exaggeration. Because the argument would be, the system is screwed up enough as it is. You don't need to kind of exaggerate that problem. It's where you can just show what's actually happening. And
Yeah.
obviously, we're in the middle of one of these disasters right now. So I
Mm.
don't know. Maybe you could do a COVID version of the hospital.
Yeah.
For our pandemic times.
It's tricky because I feel like post ER and into modern shows like The Good Doctor and The Resident, which have so many great stories on a weekly basis, like what would draw an audience into a movie, The Hospital? It's not a title that I feel most people know. Like it would have to be, I think there would have to be a pretty major star at the center of it. I feel like to get people to be interested in a movie like that. But I feel like there's something that could be done. I don't know. Mm-hmm. You never know. I mean, sometimes I'll be like, oh, that will never get remade. And then some of these titles I've mentioned on the podcast months later, they at least like announce it, like, oh, they're doing that again. You're like, oh, okay. So it can happen. We'll see. So I was kind of mixed on the movie. I give it like 2.5 stars out of 4. I'd give it like a 6 out of 10. I admired some things about it. Overall, it was a little bit of a disappointment. I thought with Chayefsky and George C. Scott, I was going to be in for something really extraordinary, and I was kind of like, it's solid, but not great. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm on a similar page with you. I really liked the first 30-40 minutes.
Yeah, that was the best part.
I thought it was kind of cruising towards, a good B plus situation. And then when we hit the skids a little bit with the one-on-one scenes of Diana Rigg's character, the movie stalls for me, and then it kind of loses track of George C. Scott's character at the end. So it did trail off, and I didn't think it capitalized on its themes that well. It just seemed sort of a case of, well, let's make a movie that is in despair about American healthcare and just create as many disasters and comical nightmares out of this situation as we can, without really advancing the argument that far. But I do think George C. Scott does his best in the first half of the movie to kind of hold it all together. So it kind of like leveled out for me similarly to you, probably like a C+ situation, something like that.
Yeah. I think it's worth a look if you're a fan of Scott, if you're like an Oscar completist, and if you like or love Network. I mean, it might be worth a look if you want to look at some more of Chayefsky's work. All right, so that takes us to our final 2 segments. The first one is called the Divine Double Feature. That's where we pick another film that you would pair with our film today, The Hospital. So what was your choice if someone finishes The Hospital, you give them one more recommendation for a movie to follow directly after, what do you go with?
So I chose this even before I'd seen it, just based on the theme. And while I was watching it, I was like, wow, I mean, it really does lead straight into this movie. And this movie is Coma, which is the Michael Crichton written and directed.
Is that the one with Michael Douglas?
Thriller, yeah, Michael Douglas and Geneviève Bujold from 1978. Which is a movie I really like, which again has a great Jerry Goldsmith score. A lot of kind of clanking paranoia down the bass end of the piano, basically, like a lot of piano. And honestly, if you watch those back to back, it would just give you the impression that American filmgoers in the 70s must have been really clued into just this like sense of, oh God, don't get ill. Basically, do not get ill and do not go to hospital because we don't trust anything that's going on in a hospital. And I do like the fact that the tone of the hospital is kind of strange and uneven. And sometimes it's veering towards this murdery thriller situation. But Coma takes that a step further because Coma is sort of a straight thriller, really. Coma is a paranoid thriller based on a Robin Cook novel, which was very successful in its day. And it's about basically patients inexplicably dying in a hospital, and it turns out that it's because they're having their organs harvested. for huge profit around America. And the theme of it kind of comes back a little bit in the 90s in that movie Extreme Measures with Hugh Grant and Gene Hackman.
Right, I've never seen that.
Which is another kind of don't trust the hospitals movie. I quite like that genre. In general, I'm quite drawn to kind of paranoid thrillers anyway. But yeah, Coma really comes off, and Genevieve Bujold is really good in it too. Pauline Kael, when she reviewed it, didn't really like the movie much, but she really liked her. She's got this kind of kittenish curiosity, and she knows something's up, and she just is determined to kind of sniff out the problem, even though it leads to her being sort of endangered and anesthetized on an operating table, and we think it's all curtains right near the end. So yeah, I recommend that movie, and I think that'll be a fun one to watch straight after this.
Oh, cool. I have not seen that one. I mean, one of the downsides of this podcast is I'm really trying to avoid watching any movies from the 70s, because if I keep going, I don't want to just rewatch a bunch of stuff.
Well, in 2028, you'll watch Coma and you'll think, oh yeah, this is why.
Oh my gosh,
yeah, right,
Tim recommended this to me 7 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's really and he was right. It's great. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm trying to like just look like the next 6 months. I'm trying not to think about 2028 yet, but if I get to that point, 78 is a great year. Every year of the 70s is just fantastic.
It's the year of my birth, 78. And when I turned 40 quite recently, my brothers bought me the poster for probably my favorite film of 1978, and also my favorite kind of paranoid thriller of the 70s, which is Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is just
Donald Sutherland,
classic, I think. Yeah, I love that film.
Ooh, that's a good one. Awesome. Yeah, so I was trying to think, I was like, what's a movie of the last 10 years that is about like a hospital situation where the camera's roaming and there's an ensemble? And the one that came to mind, I only saw it once. I really liked it. It's a movie I feel like does not ever get talked about. And it's called Parkland with Zac Efron and Marcia Gay Harden and Billy Bob Thornton and Paul Giamatti. About the aftermath, like the very specific window time of aftermath after JFK is shot and taking him into that little hospital area. And you get to see like all the different characters and how they're reacting and what they're doing. And it's kind of in real time. And it wasn't great. I remember I had some issues with some of the performances and things here and there, but I thought it was an interesting idea for a film. And I liked a lot of what they were doing, like technically with the camera. And so I feel like if you've never seen that, it might be worth a look, Following the Hospital, since it's also kind of a similar setting, but done about a very significant figure in our history. Could be kind of an interesting watch too.
And I did think a minute ago when you were talking about updating it and making a movie about being just desperate now about healthcare, even though this one was about 20 years old. Do you remember John Q? The very overheated Denzel Washington movie where he basically holds a gun to the head of people in hospital to get this operation done because he doesn't have insurance.
Yes, that'd be a good choice too.
That's sort of a quite Chayefsky-ish idea, and that character's kind of violent despair kind of times a little bit with this one, I think.
And my memory of John Q was that movie came out in the midst of awards season when Denzel Washington was getting nominated for Training Day and would ultimately win for Training Day. In the midst of that, those 2-3 months, John Q came out. It was kind of like this afterthought of a movie. But didn't it drop in like February, like early in 2002, and it kind of came and went. But I saw it in a theater. I remember being engaged by it. I remember I liked it a lot. I mean, Denzel Washington, it's hard to like Denzel Washington, like I will watch in pretty much anything and be entertained, be drawn in by him. He's just such a great actor. I'm excited to see his new Macbeth adaptation. I've not seen it yet. Have you seen that yet?
I have, yeah. I like the film, and I was a bit let down by him in it for once.
Really?
Because I totally agree with you that I normally will just kind of sign on for anything, and I kind of like the weird little films he makes, like Roman J. Israel, or those the films where he gets the one Oscar nomination. I kind of tend to like them. But this time, I don't know. I don't know if that was the right Shakespearean role for him. Perhaps.
Interesting.
But anyway, you can.
I'm going to check it out soon. It's my favorite Shakespeare play, so I'm always intrigued by new adaptations. We didn't talk about the 1971 film version on the podcast, so it was just couldn't quite get to Roman Polanski's Macbeth, but I did watch it again, and it's just such a striking, unusual movie.
It's shot so well as well. I saw it on the big screen a few years ago.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Business.
Yeah. Made right after, a year or two after the murder of Sharon Tate, and the way he uses violence in that movie. It's just like there's no other Macbeth adaptation like it. And so I think we just get a Macbeth like 2 years ago with
the Justin Kurzel one is like 2015, but yeah, it's quite recently with Michael Fassbender.
Was that 2015? I feel like that was more recent than that.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
How time flies.
So I'm intrigued to see that as well. So yeah, excellent choice there. Coma, if you have not seen Coma, I might, that's 7 years away. I might watch it.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, and then rewatch it. I watch it probably every 3 years. It's really
fun.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah. It's very, very good.
I have to check that one out. All right, so that takes us to our last segment, Beyond the Flick. I thought we'd talk today about Mr. George C. Scott. We have not talked about him in this segment on the podcast before. So if you were going to a desert island and you can only take 3 George C. Scott movies, what do you bring?
Oh man, this is kind of murder because I just, again, he's in that Denzel category for me. I'll watch him in anything, and I'm really glad I got to see this one because it was, a blind spot for me. So I'm only allowed 3. Oh gosh. The thing is, one of those films has to be The Hustler, just because The Hustler is such a great film overall. His part in it, I really like his role in it as the
Oscar nomination.
Oscar nominated CD kind of like the guy who makes the mover and the shaker in this world of underground pool, who takes Paul Newman under his wing and stages the big match with Jackie Gleason. A great part for him. You just don't trust the guy an inch, basically. And the film is just in general an all-timer for me. I love that film. Everyone is great in that film. Newman is great. Piper Laurie is great. It was the film that kind of got George C. Scott noticed. Anatomy of a Murder had already happened, and he already had his first nomination for that. So perhaps that's another one I have to put in too.
Yeah, Anatomy of a Murder was his first.
I do like him in those. Yeah, that's right. I do like him in those supporting parts early on. I think. Am I going to choose both of those though? Because then I'm running out of choices. And I really think I need to have him in one of these much later kind of meaty lead roles. Possibly The Exorcist 3, I think.
It's on my list.
He is tremendous in that film. Perhaps I'll pick those 3.
Okay.
He gives The Exorcist 3 such ballast that I think that would be my third one.
Yeah, of his later films, I guess he was acting. His last film credits are in 1999. So he was acting all the way to the end of the 90s. He pops up in things here and there, but like the movie of the last decade of his career, I think is really great, is The Exorcist 3. Such an interesting sequel. It's not really related, especially to like the second one, or it's written and directed by the author of the novel, Peter Blatty.
Peter Blatty,
Peter Blatty. And it's just a really kind of creepy version of the Exorcist story with just a dynamite George C. Scott performance at the center of it. That would be my third choice. My number 2 would be Patton. So I was like, so my rule is I'm going to go with 3 movies where he's the lead, because otherwise it's like, how do I not choose The Hustler, which we just talked about Paul Newman a few weeks ago, and I chose that as my favorite Paul Newman movie. So it really should be there, but because he's supporting in it, I'm like, okay, let me just go with the 3 leads that he's in. So The Exorcist 3, Patton. I feel like if you're a George C. Scott fan, I feel like you have to at least appreciate what he does in Patton. It's such a fantastic performance. Sure. My favorite George C. Scott movie where he's the lead is The Changeling.
Oh, it's a great film. That's a really good one.
It's one every, as you said, like I'd say every 3 years, September, October, I'll throw it on if it's on Shudder, if I find it online. Like it's just, there's something about the tone of that movie that's got an eerie quality. I love haunted house movies. Same year as The Shining. It's not at the level of The Shining, but just the death of his wife and child at the beginning is just so devastating. And
it really is.
All the little details that add to the fear and kind of his paranoia throughout that movie.
I'm glad you chose that. I think it's beautifully crafted, that film, and it has kind of faultless build up. It really is one of those haunted house movies that doesn't show you anything too soon. It's always the mistake, is to show too much too soon. It just it just gradually builds up and has you in the palm of its hand. I really love the first properly supernatural thing that even occurs in that film is just a single note playing on the piano, ding, out of nowhere, and you see the key on the piano go down, and you're like, now we're in trouble. And that's such a brilliant, just simple way to kind of like signal what's coming. Yeah, that's a great choice. I think I love I love him in it too, but I think the film wins there. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to fix one thing. Since I chose these supporting ones, I'm going to merge those into one. That's just counts as
there you go.
Two nominations just count as one. And then I'm going to, just as a finale, I'm going to mention Paul Schrader's Hardcore,
which is I have not seen. I've heard it's
forgotten,
great.
Neglected film, and quite a bleak viewing experience in which George C. Scott's character goes searching for his missing daughter, who's basically been in some way sold into a kind of sex slavery ring, or she's something terrible has happened to her on the streets of New York, wherever it's set. And it was Paul Schrader's first film after writing Taxi Driver.
Okay.
And it has that similar. He's clearly obsessed with John Ford's The Searchers, because his films are always about going on a search for someone and sort of trying to rescue them from this situation. And I think that film is fascinating and allows George C. Scott to give one of his kind of most soul-wrecking performances. So there we go. We've covered a lot of bases there, but Changeling was a great choice.
Yeah, I've heard really great things about Hardcore. It's definitely one of those I want to check out. I would also mention his performance in A Christmas Carol is really fun. I just watched it for the first time a year ago. I'd never seen his version. I really liked him in that. And then films of his I've not seen. I want to see Day of the Dolphin from '73, which I'm sure we'll get to in the podcast because it's directed by Mike Nichols. I just read the fantastic Mark Harris book. It's not supposed to be very good, but I'm like intrigued by
I wouldn't mind
George C. Scott and Mike Nichols and what the story is. It just looks very strange. Like I'm excited to watch that.
He loved working with Mike Nichols as well. Okay. He talked about it in an interview around that time. He just adored Mike Nichols and would have kind of done anything for him, I think. Yeah. And he didn't always have very comfortable relationships with his directors or his co-stars. George C. Scott, he was famously cantankerous and would just sort of storm off set and go and get drunk and so on and cause a lot of trouble. But he had a great time with Mike Nichols, apparently.
Yeah. So I want to see that. And then one of my favorite films is 12 Angry Men by Sidney Lumet. I have not seen the 90s version that I guess Scott is in. It's got a big cast. I think it was made in 97.
Yeah, I like that movie. I like that version, actually. There's a lot. Michael T. Williamson is really good in that. Who else is in it?
Is it the same case?
Hume Cronin is in it.
Okay.
He's like 90 if he's a day in it, but he's in it. It's the exact same case. In fact, it may even be the same script.
It's just the same script. Okay.
Very minimally updated from the play, but just with a completely different cast. And
you remember, is George C. Scott the Henry Fonda role?
No,
or is that someone else?
The Henry Fonda role is Jack. I think it's Jack Lemmon.
Oh, that would make sense.
Right? I'm going to look this up because
I think you're right. Knowing. It's probably Jack Lemmon.
Angry Man 97. I think it's Jack Lemmon in that role. I think George C. Scott might be in the role that was played by Lee J. Cobb in the original.
Oh, that would make sense.
Oh no, hang on, I'm wrong.
The kind of cranky one.
I think they give that to Michael T. Williamson, which is a really interesting shift.
I think if you're going to remake it, you'd have to change it up a little bit.
You do, yeah. Edward James Olmos is in it. Courtney B. Vance is in it. William Peterson, Dorian Harewood, Tony Danza.
Tony Danza.
Yeah. But yeah, George C. Scott is juror number 3, and I now need to know who that is.
Okay. Wasn't the holdout at the end of the 57? Wasn't that juror number 2? DJ Cobb?
Right. Yeah, I think that's right.
I just feel like George C. Scott is at a certain stature. Like,
yeah, and
wouldn't he get one of the main?
No, he is number 3. He is Lee J. Cobb. Yeah.
Oh, he is. That's his Lee J. Cobb.
Yeah,
that would make sense.
Number 2 is like there's the kind of ranting racist character.
Oh, okay.
I think that's number 2.
Yeah, I'm like George C. Scott would not have played just any of those men. I think he would play the Lee J. Cobb role.
Yeah.
So I want to see that. And I also really enjoy Inherit the Wind from 1960 with Spencer Tracy. I guess that was maybe his last movie. It came out in 99. He's in that. So I would watch that as well. So there's a few to get to.
Have you seen Petulia? The Richard Lester movie, Petulia, really good.
What year is that?
Is it 67?
Oh, in the 60s.
Something like
okay.
That. I'm just going to look that up again. I have seen it. 68. And it's, it's George C. Scott and Julie Christie in a very interesting, quite modish 60s kind of romantic drama, which I liked a lot when I saw it. It's got music by John Barry. Richard Chamberlain is in it, strangely. But yeah, I like that a lot. It's something that I saw about 7 or 8 years ago. I remember being very impressed by it at the BFI.
Yeah. He's such a remarkable career. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. He's in the Firestarter adaptation.
I almost thought about Firestarter. I have a lot of fondness for that film.
Yeah, it's some issues, but he's really great in it. Drew Barrymore's really good in that.
Yeah.
I guess speaking of Zac Efron, I mentioned for Parkland, I think there's a new adaptation of Firestarter coming out in a few months with Zac Efron. So that's
I like how much George C. Scott was clearly drawn towards genre pictures, and especially horror. If you think about Exorcist 3, Firestarter, and The Changeling.
Yeah, he's not afraid of doing horror films. Yeah, like in the 80s, yeah.
In the same way that like Betty Davis went down that direction in her career and did horror, he likes it.
Yeah. Some actors are like those and no to horror films. Like that's the genre that's off limits, but not George C. Scott. He was willing to do like a quiet haunted house horror film, and then a little bit more broad, like Stephen King adaptation. He wasn't, he refused the Oscar, but it's not like he would turn away from kind of just a broad entertainment vehicle. Like he would do Firestarter.
he's just so believable whenever anything happens to him in a film that's sort of meant to be disturbing. Or in the hospital, there's a scene where one of the patients tries to strangle him, and he's recoiling from that for the rest of the scene. And his recoil is so believable. He just doesn't put a foot wrong in terms of you buying into the situation that he's in. Even though he's sort of in a comedy, he's playing it completely for real. And I do think there's a lot in common between comedy and horror as genres, in the sense that you just have to play the reality of it. And in horror, you have to not sort of tip the wink that you're in some outlandish supernatural scenario. You just play it as if it is literally happening to you.
Yeah.
And he's very good at that.
And then the last film, did we mention Dr. Strangelove? He's also great in Dr. Strangelove.
And he claims to have written half of it himself. He was never shy about taking credit for things, George C. Scott. He claims to have written a lot of his own dialogue in that. But what a great role he had in that.
Yeah, it's hard to stand out when you have Peter Sellers playing 3 roles. but he does, he's great in that too.
What is his line? What is it, like 200 million dead tops, depending on the break, something like that.
That's one of the classic lines. Yeah, so it was really fun to talk to you today, Tim, about the hospital and the career of George C. Scott. As we wrap up here, I'd love for you to tell our listeners where they can find you online, and if you have anything you'd like to promote, feel free to discuss that now.
I have nothing to promote. I can promote the Telegraph.
Telegraph.
Just on the Telegraph website, my reviews will be up there.
Okay.
And that's it. I've really enjoyed this very much, though. Merry Christmas to everyone.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here, Tim. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.